welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Yet another great episode for you. Today we're going to be speaking to Brandon Hurd about ancient American secrets revealed. But Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, psychic readings, and energy healing. So if there's stuff going on in your life, if you need to get some guidance on where to go next, issues going on in your career, and especially if you have some health issues that you need some help working through, explanation, the doctors can't really figure out what's going on with you, give me a call, send me an email, and we can set up a time for a private consultation. Also on my webpage are links for the release of my book, E.T. Chronicles, which was just released this past week, October 1st, as well as my video Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancient. That's a video download that you can get on Amazon.com, but the links are on they're on my Soul Healer webpage, soulhealer.com. The show is also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can become a medical intuitive counselor, or certified energy medicine practitioner. And for the month of October, we are having a blowout sale. So if you sign up for the program this month, you will receive 30% off our training. If it's something you're interested in, you might want to download our 50-page free guide, Jumpstart Your Intuition. Let's see, any other announcements today? Actually, one last thing in a couple of weeks is the History, Haunts, and Legends Conference in spooky Jefferson, Texas, one of my favorite events to go to. I'll be there speaking. It is November 1st in spooky Jefferson. And so if you are in the Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas area, or further out than that, it's something you might want to check out. You can get more information at jeffersonghostwalk.com, and that event is November 1st, Saturday, November 1st. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Brandon and get him on the air. Brandon Hurd is a U.S. Army veteran with service in Afghanistan and Iraq. He has a master's degree in psychology as well as a BS in management. He has researched and reported on mysterious locations throughout the United States, Europe, and the Middle East. He is an instructor for the U.S. Army Command and General Staff Officers School, as well as secondary education teacher. His book is Ancient Mississippi, and please welcome to Just Energy Radio, Brandon Hurd. Hey, Brandon, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me, Dr. Rita.
Well, I am just so glad to have you come on. You know, there aren't that many people that really research antiquities in America, so it's always nice to kind of balance things out, because people are always, investigating Egypt and Iraq and all these other places. And I think there's just a big hole, which we're going to kind of talk a little bit more about what's going on in America. But I just think that there's a big hole, and I'm glad that you're looking to starting to fill those gaps. Blah, blah, blah.
Well, I'm glad you know there is a big hole. There's a huge gaping hole, okay? Mm-hmm. And there's a school of thought that can, I believe, fill that hole. And it's called diffusionism.
But we'll get to that. We are like so not there yet. Not there yet. But I wasn't going to go here yet. But why do you think that, we go and we investigate all of these other countries? Why isn't there any investigation that's really happening in the United States? I mean, my little conspiracy theory mind jumps in on this whole question, but I'd like to get your thought on that topic.
Well, I mean, history is an industry in the academic world. What is quote unquote accepted history? There's a lot of effort, and a lot of people's reputations are at stake. So they're not really very open to ideas or evidence that falls outside of quote unquote accepted history.
Well, all right, you want to hear my little conspiracy theory thing?
I've got one too, but you go first.
Okay, so my little conspiracy theory is that if they give the Native Americans credit for the successes that they've had and the level of culture that they have experienced, then we couldn't call them savages and just take their land away.
That's exactly my conspiracy theory, yes.
Great minds think alike.
Exactly.
Okay, back to the real show. So let me ask you this. How did you get interested in investigating what's going on, in your own backyard?
Well, it started just a few years ago where I had written an article for Mississippi Magazine about a much more recent historical location in Natchez, Mississippi, called the Devil's Punch Bowl. And that story it's one of those places where the truth is stranger than fiction. And it involved America's first serial killers, slave uprising, buried pirate treasure, sexual mutilation, murders, all in one little small place in Natchez, Mississippi. And so I wrote that, and then I was looking for the next great thing. And I found that I like to write about mysterious people, places, and things. So I got on the internet and I Googled up Mysterious Mississippi. And that's kind of how I fell into the rabbit hole.
Because more than like one webpage came up?
Well, there was one particular story from a 1900 issue of the New York Times. And it talked about a mysterious structure in a remote part of Mississippi that they refer to as the Brandywine stone wall. And so it goes on to describe a assortment of cut and placed stones that, if they were stacked high, would cover an area 4 miles by 4 miles. And that's pretty impressive for a structure. And it went on to suggest that this was some unknown ancient civilization must have constructed this. So I took that as kind of a challenge, and I went to the Department of History and Archives, and I'm digging through all the records. And in fact, back in the late 1800s, there was considerable debate about this structure. Or was it a structure, man-made structure, or natural formation? And the field reporters at the time, the people who wrote the reports from the field, strongly suggested it was a man-made structure. However, in the editorial remarks, they were going back and an argument ensued where they were saying that, well, the geologists agree it's a natural formation. Well, I'm saying it's kind of both. There is a natural formation of stones there, and they just generally resemble cut stones. However, there's certain areas where, in fact, they have been placed and arranged by an ancient civilization and used for various purposes. So I get out and I go to this part of the state, and I'm knocking on doors for a few days, and I eventually ended up at a property that was owned by, the owner had recently died, and he was generally a hermit. And all over this property there was cut stones. Some of them had inscriptions and markings on them. There was a 9-foot-long carved snake out of stone with it had a polished flat top, and it had a bowl carved into the back of it. It also had like snake, the sides were carved, and it had like snake rings carved around the tail. There were 3 large stone heads that were pulled out of a pond beside the property, and some other artifacts that are kind of the signature artifacts of an ancient civilization that is accepted to have been in the area at that time. It's called the Poverty Point culture.
Okay, so these walls are interesting because you're talking about this wall that's in Mississippi. I used to live in Rockwall, where there's the rock wall of Rockwall. And it seems like there has been this activity and this building activity happening in the U.S. that they don't even understand why they were doing it. So let me ask this question. So is this, all right, so because up until your material, I've never heard of this. And actually, until I moved to Rockwall, I never heard of the Rockwall of Rockwall. But the one in Rockwall, it's kind of a rectangle shape. So is this thing in some kind of a shape, or is it straight? Anything like that?
It was an area that has been heavily flooded throughout the early 1900s. So, if there was a much larger structure, it would have certainly been covered up by now. But what is there now are some outcroppings of these stones that have been placed and mortared together in certain areas.
And see, the mortared together part, I think, is very interesting. I'm just trying to think. I know, like in South America, in Peru, they have the stones that, fit right up against each other. And I'm trying to recall if in Mesoamerica, I guess their rocks are mortared together. So in any other American indigenous cultures, have we seen that kind of craftsmanship?
Not that there are various stone forts in the Indiana area and other parts of the Ohio Valley that were made by, I'm going to just leave that blank for now. We may talk about that later, who may have built those. Also in Tennessee, there are examples of stone, even large stone structures. And Native Americans weren't generally credited with building from large stones. However, that's very much not the case. There are, in the early accounts of archaeologists, there are numerous reports of stone forts and other stone structures.
See, this is that whole cover-up thing.
Yeah.
I just find that so fascinating.
Well, it's a thing. It's when the idea, and it first came about in the early 1800s, when the idea of manifest destiny was begun to be sold to the American public. The idea that the European white man had a God-given right to North America from the East Coast to the West Coast. Well, that's when they began to paint the picture of the Native Americans as being savages and having no appreciable civilization. So, throughout North America, there have been sites, a lot of sites that were, significant Native American sites have been built over, but that's where large cities are now.
Sad as that may be. Okay.
And I've been this past summer. I spent a lot of time in the Northeast at museums, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Princeton University Museum, and the University of Pennsylvania Museum, and they all have tremendous collections of Native American artwork and artifacts that portray the Native American as far more advanced than general history does. However, in Manhattan, right near Wall Street, arguably the most valuable real estate on planet Earth, there's a very large, very beautiful building. It's the Museum of the American Indian.
I've been there.
I know that place. It's the worst example of a museum that I've come across. It's just a horrible museum. I hate to say that, but it is. I mean, they have a lot of their stuff is from the early 1900s, and all of it it's the story that they're selling, and they're selling it on the most valuable piece of real estate in the world.
Well, that's because they got it for like $25.
Well, yeah.
It was a bargain.
It was a deal at the time, but they could get a lot of money for it now too. And that's the spot where they're continuing to sell the story that it relieves people of potential guilt.
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting is, when we think of the Americas, North and South, Central and South America, we always think of all of this monumental architecture happening, in Mesoamerica or in South America. In the Americas, why don't we see that kind of structure, that kind of building? Was it a materials issue? Or was it because they weren't, and I hate to say as advanced, but as advanced?
A combination of the two.
Okay.
And another thing, another aspect is why were the South American indigenous people, why were they more advanced? Well, that's another chapter in the story. It's the idea of diffusionism, the idea that ancient civilizations traveled and shared ideas far more extensively than history gives them credit for. Well, in this case, there's a overwhelming body of evidence that that among many others, there were Egyptians, North Africans, Japanese, all seem to visit certain parts of Peru and southern Mexico.
I mean, I don't believe that the structures that we see in South America, in Cusco and that area, Pumapunco, were at all recent. And I mean, that's my feeling, that they predate any culture going around the world, doing anything. My opinion.
Yes, that's one of the mysteries of mankind, that even those structures were the very large, very finely edged stone. There's no way, I can't offer a plausible explanation for that, and unfortunately, accepted archaeologists and historians, they can't either. So that's a big question mark. Now, something interesting that I have come about is, when you start talking about the time frames of things as far as human occupation of the Americas. Well, I've come across, there's, when I was in elementary school, it was taught that, the Asians came across the land bridge into North America and settled, from North America to South America. That was about 9,000 BC. However, there's a compelling case, and it's accepted by many academics, that in Brazil there was a burgeoning civilization that popped up around 50,000 BC, and there's a very strong case for that. Now, they were not from Asia. It appears that they were aboriginals, probably from Polynesia, so that's
Well, yeah, and I think that concept is really interesting. And I love how it gets dismissed when they find evidence of foodstuffs that originated, like in Polynesia, like sweet potatoes. I don't think sweet potatoes are indigenous to America, and some other things that they claim and support the concept that they are not Asians. Even though there was an Asian influx. I mean, I do agree with that, but from what I understand, that was like one of the later influxes and not one of the early ones.
Yeah. Well, the idea of the sweet potato, that's suggestive that it was that the Polynesian islands, Easter Island, other areas of there, were peopled by people from Peru, because the sweet potato is indigenous to South America. And
so the other way around.
It's the other way around, yeah.
Okay.
So it's the sweet potato is evidence that it was peopled from Peru, and it went to the west.
See, I know stuff, just sometimes not so accurate information. Or
that's part of the whole Thor Heyerdahl experiment. Where he was building these ships and boats based on ancient technology, and he was sailing. He sailed from Iraq. He's down through south. He sailed around Africa in ancient Sumerian style ships, and then he sailed to the Mediterranean. From there, he sailed using Egyptian ancient building technology. He successfully sailed to South America, and then he went from South America. He built a ship that sailed to many thousands of miles to, I forget the exact island, but he's one of the Polynesian islands.
Well, didn't he also either go to Easter Island or come from Easter Island in one of those boats?
He commissioned a study. I think he contracted a large research vessel, and they had a good time. It was like one of these. It wasn't in one of his wooden craft. It was in a nice ship that they went and studied Easter Island for a while.
Yeah, I just find the whole thing interesting. One of the things you were talking about was a carved serpent, and the serpent in, there's the serpent mound in Ohio. The serpent turns up obviously over and over again in Mayan culture, with the feathered serpent and Quetzalcoatl. Do you think that there's a relationship one to the other?
Yes, I think there's a very distinct relationship. I never thought I would know how to spell the word Quetzalcoatl, but I can spell Quetzalcoatl now fairly easily because it appears probably about 100 times throughout my book. So if that says anything. But this
I'm not even going to make a comment. All right, I'll make a comment. Okay. I can spell it over and over and over again in my book and still spell it wrong every single time.
It just seems to flow right out now.
Yeah.
It's anyway, so that's kind of that whole story of the Brandywine stone wall. That allowed me to meet another a local university professor from Mississippi, Dr. Robert List. He and I kind of teamed up, and he gave me some literature that had there were some other accounts of odd structures in Mississippi that had not been researched until now. There was
so before you do that, so who is this Dr. List guy? What's his background, credentials, whatever?
He is a Yankee who moved to Mississippi.
Hey.
He is a regular contributor to Ancient American magazine. He's also written several books. He's a professor of at the Jackson State University here in Jackson, Mississippi. And I wish I could say these ideas were mine, but I was just kind of I was kind of more of the field work guy, and he was the one that as we were moving through these different locations, he was predicting what we would find, and pretty much without fail, whatever he said we'd find, we found. And he was able to, the things that I would just walk by, he could look at it and he could make connections. So he's been instrumental, and this stuff would never have happened without his wealth of knowledge. And he spent 20 years traveling throughout Mexico, and he's been to many of the Olmec sites. He's very familiar with the Olmec culture. Mm-hmm. And that's where we make a connection between the Brandywine Stonewall site. We found an artifact that, in addition to the Quetzalcoatl 9-foot-long carved snake, we found a celt, an artifact that was identical to Olmec artifacts.
So what's a celt?
It's a small stone phallic symbol. It was something that an ancient would have held that would have denoted his rank.
Any mythology on that? I'm just curious.
Other than it's a phallic symbol, and
the phallic symbol.
Yeah, the bigger the bigger rank you were. Yeah. So, and identically shaped celts have been found at Olmec sites in southern Mexico.
Contemporary society is so quick to say, "Oh, it's a phallic symbol," but if you start looking at other mythological groups and the iconography, we have the lightning bolt, quote unquote, that Zeus carries, that if you kind of morph it a little bit, I guess could look like a phallic symbol, if it just had rounded edges. And anyway, so I'm just going to throw that out for you to think about, Well, it's like, everything is for ritualistic purposes, so like that wall that you guys found, was it for ritualistic purposes?
Well, I believe the snake.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing in general.
The snake, it appears that it very well could have been an altar of some kind. That's what it seems to be. Mm-hmm. So that was one. That was the first site, and then we found the second site that was based on another piece of literature from the 1800s.
Well, I want to go back to the snake a minute. Okay. So, based on your observation, your belief is that the snake actually laid flat versus stood up and was some kind of a megalith marker kind of thing.
Yes, it lays flat on the ground.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, and if I had it weighs several tons, and if I could go get it, I probably would. So, but it's just too big to move right now. We'd like to preserve it, but it's going to lay where it's at for now until some better funded researchers can go in and study this place.
But see, that's the thing. It's like, you find stuff and no one digs, no one, what it makes me think of is like Göbekli Tepe, that, and I can't remember the archaeologist's name off the top of my head. But he saw some flint chips and knew that there was some kind of early culture there and started an excavation, and bam, Göbekli Tepe. How do we know that we won't find something like that here?
Yeah, well, we not far from where I live. It was fairly recently a regular citizen found the oldest man-made structure in the Western Hemisphere. It's in Watson Brake, Louisiana, and it dates to about 5,400 years ago, about 3,500 BC, and it was found and published. Articles were published by an amateur archaeologist. Her name was Rita Jones. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't for amateurs out there, a lot of the strides around here anyway wouldn't be moving forward, because except some of the scholars around here seem to be scared of some of this stuff. At least that's what I've encountered when I've tried to share the artifacts that we found with some of the university archaeologists. It seems to scare them.
Well, they don't know what to do with it because, they didn't find it and it wasn't on their grant and blah,
yes,
blah,
yes,
blah, blah,
yeah,
blah.
blah. Exactly.
I mean, it's kind of like the Kensington runestone. It was found, it was unearthed, it traveled around, and now it can't be real and it can't be something valid because a certified archaeologist did not take it out of the ground during an expedition.
Exactly. And it's the same case here. So
okay, so we have the wall, which I wrote down the name, but I can't read my handwriting, so we'll just say the wall, and we have the snake. So what else was found in the Brandywine location?
Okay, we found...
Oh, and the phallic symbol.
Yeah. We found these clay cooking balls, which are a signature artifact of the Poverty Point culture, which was in this area. There's a much larger and actual location that's referred to as Poverty Point, Louisiana, and the people who live there are referred to as the people of the Poverty Point culture. And this is a fairly new addition to ancient history, this Poverty Point culture. The location which is not far, it's in Louisiana, and it was just recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And they've only really excavated about, I think, 0.25% so far. And there are a lot of things there that ring of an Egyptian influence at Poverty Point, Louisiana. Several things that are suggestive of if nothing else, an Egyptian guidance and influence in the construction of the site, and in some of the artifacts that are found there.
Where is this location that you're talking about? Is it in like northern Louisiana?
Yeah, it's not close to anything in particular, but it's if you wanted to look out on Google Maps, it's near Epps, Louisiana, EPPS, and it's about maybe 20 miles from it connects. It's on a body of water that connects to the Mississippi River, and did in ancient times too.
Okay, I'm just asking because I almost live in Louisiana now.
Oh,
so
cool.
I'm like, hey,
well,
you'll see a little
sign.
quick old buzz
Yeah,
down the road.
If you'll see this if you go on I-20 towards Mississippi, about maybe 30 miles before you get to Mississippi, you would see a big sign that says Poverty Point Archaeological Site. And it's about a 15-minute drive north of there. So it's open.
Cool.
They have an incredible museum, and some of the artifacts there are incredible. I mean, they have some artifacts that were, it appears that they were made on a precision metal lathe. It's difficult to believe that these were made by a civilization that supposedly was there 2000 to 1000 BC. That's when this group of people occupied the area.
Well, and we're gonna put that in quote unquote. How's that?
Okay.
Okay, but we have a dating question that just came up from Canoe, a new visitor to the chat room. And he said, many dates have been dropped very easily during this interview. 3400 BC, 8000 BC. I have to read this. Dendrochronology might be able to get dates like this, but carbon dating wouldn't. What method was used beside other people's research to gather these dates?
I'm going to go with other people's research.
Okay.
And it's, I don't, these are, I'll be honest with you, some of it comes from Wikipedia, some of it. So, it's what's in, the dates are typically, Wikipedia is going to be where I get probably the majority of my dates.
And so you're not claiming to date this. What your goal is, it sounds like, is to bring this material to the population at large to go, hey, look, there's stuff here.
Yeah, we're standing on the backs of others here.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, as far as some of the material that you're bringing forward, I mean, one of the things that I have noticed is that there was a lot more information exchange. I mean, we think about it now, but it seems like people were much freer to talk about things they find, things they discover prior to 1940. And then something changed and it became very political and much more closed mouth. And so I would think that any reports after the 1940s would be minimal, but it sounds like the newspaper articles that you've been finding all have predated.
Yes.
That magic line in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a secret.
Yes.
So of the, we were talking about the wall. How much of the wall remains, or do we even know how big that wall is or was?
There are outcroppings that cover an area several miles, encompasses several miles, but really we focused on a very small segment of the structure, and that's where we pulled out these artifacts and some other things. Okay, this is where it gets we take an odd turn here. Next to this structure that appears to have been a hearth, okay, it was a large stone hearth that the stones on the sides that are obviously placed by man at some point. They're buried in the dirt very well, but they're replaced. There's burn marks on the stones, and we using metal detectors, just in one specific area, we found buried iron right where there would be fire pits in this structure. Which, according to history, there was no iron smelting in North America prior to Columbus. Mm-hmm. However, we find an overwhelming amount of evidence that in fact it was occurring here at this one site. We also find scattered all over the property large amounts of chunks of iron slag, which would be the byproduct of refining iron. And you would knock the impurities that bubble to the top. You would knock those off, and you'd have a bar of iron. And we find the slag in the area in large quantity.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask maybe the million-dollar questions. What were the Native Americans using the iron, or do you think that one of these other groups that you were talking about earlier were coming here, getting the iron, converting it into bars or whatever they would convert it into, and then hauling it back off?
Yes, the latter. A Mediterranean civilization. Most likely, based on some of the artifacts at the site, an Egyptian operation, also an African presence, and they appear to have been based out of southern Mexico, what's identified as the Olmecs, where all these civilizations kind of came together and kind of morphed with each other. They appeared to have some kind of an iron production operation where at least one of the sites in North America was in Mississippi. There are other ancient sites further north that I've not personally visited, but there have been a great deal of material published about where there's evidence of iron refining in North America.
Okay. I mean, I think the Olmec are a very interesting culture, and My interaction with them is mostly through their artwork, and their artwork was phenomenal. And anything that really came after the Olmec period is just a cheap kind of knockoff imitation of something exquisite. My opinion.
Yes, that's obvious. It's what anybody with a clear brain can see. That's what the Olmec culture popped up around 1500 BC without having anything that really led up to it. It just popped up with the giant carved stone heads that are quite obviously genetically African. Okay, even to the point where they wear the odd helmets. These are the 8-foot tall stones that I'm talking about, and they have the war helmets of the type that were worn in Africa. And these warriors had cornrows. They wore their hair in cornrows, an African hairstyle. So, however, conventional archaeologists would argue that no, these were indigenous, Native Americans there. And in fact, during digs in the 1960s, they record a cemetery in La Venta, Mexico, an Olmec site, where they record Africoid skeletons in the cemetery. So, I don't know how much evidence you need, but it's there, and in stone, carved in stone, that can't be washed away. It's hard to wash it away, but they try.
Well, and I was just thinking, 1500 BC was, the time of the Exodus, and what else was going on the planet or in the more civilized cultures at that point in time, and did they have that level of art? And I guess they did. And so if it was brought in from somewhere else, it would make sense why they would be able to produce items that are exquisite.
Yes. Well, that was 1500 BC, and I'm just going to say that's the accepted date for the Olmec culture. I'm going to suggest that it probably went back, much farther than that. Okay. However, that's what they date these Olmec sites to, that have no predecessor. That would have been at the end of the Bronze Age, towards the end of the Bronze Age in Europe, and at the dawning of the Iron Age. So that line in the sand is about 1200 BC. So we're talking the Bronze Age went in Europe from about 2500 BC to the dawn of the Iron Age. And there's another site in Mississippi that I'd like to talk about too. That is, to me, it's by far the most interesting site, and contains the most powerful evidence, and it connects to the Bronze Age in Europe.
Okay, and what site would that be?
It's a location on the Pearl River. It's where there's an assortment of stones that the only thing on planet Earth that they match identically are stone anchors of the type used in the ancient Mediterranean. They match identically to stone anchors that were found off the coast of Israel, for example, and in other places. But these stones, they all have a uniform. There's 3 of them. They all have a uniform 5-inch hole near the center, and they have the same general shape of the stone anchors of the type used in the Mediterranean. And one of them has a carved tablet on the front of it. And that's where it gets very interesting. Myself and Dr. List, we spent many, many hours on this carved tablet trying to kind of pull out of it what it contained. And I can tell you that in general, it matches stone tablets of the type of the Minoans from the island of Crete. They were the Minoans were trading partners with the Egyptians, and they were the copper merchants of that era. So the tablet in that stone anchor matches very closely their style of artisanship. Now, it was so faded that there were distinct designs in it, but we couldn't put them together because of the surface was rough, and it was just the colors of the stone. It was hard for the human eye to put it all together, and that's when we were fortunate enough to be joined by another member to the team, Amy McDonald, she's a local artist, and she found us through just sheer serendipity and determination on her part. She had also kind of been on this quest. So she joined the team, and she spent a great deal of time with the stones and taking photographs using different techniques. And she came up with some sketches of just a pencil on paper that depict. It's a lot easier to understand the images after she gave it her treatment. And one is a distinct Egyptian bird hieroglyph that stands alone off to the side. In the middle other part of the tablet is a boat that appears to have oars hanging off the side. And on another part of the stone tablet is what appears to be a double-bladed Minoan-style axe. And then there's some other designs that we just really can't put them together. They could be reeds or some type of other plant life or something. But so it's that continues to be studied, and so that's what's there. What's interesting is that the place where they were found, it was predicted evidence of this type would be found. There's a theory that's been out there for probably 100 years or so about in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's accepted archaeology that there was, during ancient times, 3000 BC to about 1000 BC, that there were open pit copper mines. And during that period of time, it's been, there are estimates of between 500 million pounds to 1.5 billion pounds of copper, a very pure, high-grade copper, was removed from the mines of Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
And I think people have heard about that,
Yes.
Remotely.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a question that was from way back, but now seems like an appropriate place to toss it in. Have there been any finds of shipwrecks? I mean, I know that it wouldn't be the same kind of a shipwreck that would support this seafaring, metal grabbing culture.
Yes. Off the coast of Turkey, a Minoan ship. It's referred to as the Ulu Barun shipwreck. It was found, I believe, in the early 80s by a sponge diver, and it contained these copper ingots that are referred to as ox hides. And these copper ingots that were removed from the shipwreck, they have characteristics of copper that would have come from North America. However, these ox hides have been studied, and they've never been. There's an isotopic technique that can be used to determine their origin, and a lot of the copper ingots that have been found. Some of them they can trace to copper mines in Africa or Europe, but they refuse to. They're not open to the concept to test them against North American copper. They refuse to do that. So it's impossible to make that connection unless you get a pure copper oxide and you give it an isotopic test versus North American copper. Nobody will do that test. And first of all, you have to get one of these artifacts, and second of all, you have to have money to do that. And those people that have both of those things refuse to consider the North American connection. So yes, they have found that shipwreck. There are other shipwrecks that have been Roman as well as Egyptian vessels off the coast of Brazil, off the coast of Venezuela, off the coast of Massachusetts, and I just got a report a few days ago of that off the coast of Florida, St. Augustine, an intact Egyptian ship was found. It was laden with Mesoamerican tradeware. And I'm kind of trying to put that story together right now. I think that would be kind of a smoking gun.
That's, I just love how all of this is surprised, because you're talking about this stuff and I'm like, really? Never heard of that. Really? Never heard of that.
It's out there. I mean, I'm not making anything up here.
Well, no, I know you're not making it up, but it's just, investigating Native, I'm more of a myth girl, philosophical girl than, archaeology. I like archaeology, but anyway, you really like running out there and going into the field, which I think is great, because somebody has to do it and knock on doors and have it be important and stuff like that. But you were talking about the anchors that were found. And I think that there were some anchors that were found, off the East Coast as well. And I want to say that they were found by Bimini. People try tying it to Atlantis and that whole thing.
Yeah. There is that as well. Yes, I've seen those. However, I'm going to say that the stone anchors at this site, they match identically in shape and size to the type that were used in that era in the Mediterranean. And I'm going to be honest, some of the stone anchors that I've seen, they really don't look the same. So now, kind of back to the ancient copper trade theory, that it was predicted that this type of evidence would be found on this specific waterway in Mississippi because of the Mississippi connection to this ancient copper trade theory. On the Mississippi Gulf Coast, there are two archaeological sites side by side, and they're at the mouth of the Pearl River, which is where these stone anchors were found further north. And on these two archaeological sites, there were some unusual findings there. I mean, they say that they were quote unquote poverty culture type sites because they do find artifacts from that era, the Poverty Point culture there. But they also have some other very unusual characteristics of just an Native American site. The archaeological reports said that the people it was two different cultures who occupied each of the two sites. They lived side by side. Two different cultures. It said they were foreigners who spoke a different language than the locals. On these two sites, there were very long and deep hearths, burn pits. So they had a very large operation of some kind of factory where they were burning something. They had a 100-meter long, 100 meters of hearths on each of these two sites that are side by side. So it's been hypothesized that the copper was taken to these sites, and that's where it was melted into the oxide molds. As far as evidence for that theory, they find a lot of these clay pieces that seem to have no usable purpose, and the suggestion is that these clay pieces were forms for the oxides that they were poured into. And like I said, one of the when they drilled into the core of one of the copper oxides that was found in the Mediterranean. It depicted characteristics of copper that would have been poured under conditions like this, and it was poured in multiple pourings in a moist, wet environment. That's why it's called. They refer to it as blister copper, and there's a lot of cavities inside these copper ingots, and it's to the point where if they're actually kind of fragile. If you were to drop one, they say they shatter because it's so porous.
And is it a mechanism of the technology of the day, or was it more based on the less than stellar conditions that they were working under?
Probably both. They were working under less than stellar conditions. I mean, had these fire pits going. Mississippi is a fairly moist environment, and they were probably sweating. There's a lot of water getting on these things. But it seems to fit. It seems to fit the hypothesis here.
But see, that I just find that interesting. Any thoughts on who might have been doing all of the work? I mean, mining is not a simple operation. Smelting is not a simple operation. Do you think that if it was Mediterraneans coming here, that they were enslaving the natives, or do you think they kept separate and just did their own business?
It seems logical that they would have enslaved the locals or somehow procured their labor, most likely under slave circumstances, though.
Is there any, you talked about them living in near, in a encampment near there, but there isn't any references to being put into labor or anything like that, referring back to the mining operations?
I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of any legends of slavery. That falls outside of the evidence that I've seen.
Okay. We have a question from somebody that's not in the chat room, Mark, and he wanted to know if there were any reports of these people being giants.
No. I haven't come across a giant connection here.
Okay.
That I've personally come across. There does seem to have been a group of giants that lived throughout the Americas. There's a lot of evidence for that, but it doesn't really play into this particular story here.
One of the things that I know that is all over the Mississippi, Ohio Valley are mounds. And, you've been talking about these rock formations, but where these rock formations have been found, is there also a mound culture associated with it?
There is a mound culture, and it was, like I said, the Poverty Point site, which, and I did mention earlier that it depicts evidence of Egyptian influence, and they have a very large, very, very large mound there that is called the Bird Mound. It's Mound A on the site, and it depicts a very large bird of some kind, which it's been suggested it could be a symbol for Horus, the Egyptian bird deity. Another thing at Poverty Point is that it's a series of concentric rings that covers a mile, about almost 1 mile across. And this series of concentric rings, it matches, Egyptian style of a board game. It's called Mayhen. And it was a game that was played in Egypt and throughout the Mediterranean in an ancient area. And they also find at the Poverty Point site these clay artifacts that they look like they were dice, or they would look like they were some other type of game pieces. So it's hypothesized that this was some type of a place where they were, in addition to, They also find traces of copper, large traces of copper. So somehow the Poverty Point site in Louisiana tied into the copper trade, and it may have been someplace where they stopped and rested for a while or something. But another signature of Egyptian influence is the figures, the clay figures that they find there are they have a cleft head, which is it's.
I am not paying attention to the time, but we need to go to break. So I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're talking to Brandon Hurd about his book, Ancient Mississippi, and we will be back with Brandon after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Are you looking for a cure for boredom? Never worry. IRN's new interactive website introduces a number of ways to pass time while you listen to your favorite show. Choose anything from the IRN chat lounge, the game lounge, video lounge, or the mood lounge. These fun, exciting features let you chat in real time with fellow listeners, view live skywatches, play daily posted online games, or pick a show based on topic. The choices are endless. Use your time wisely, keeping it all on IRN.
Hi, can you hear my voice? Imagine how many other people can hear it too. If you have advertising needs, then look no further. The Inception Radio Network currently has openings for on-air advertisements and radio show sponsorships. Given any thought to your target demographic? Inception has you covered there too. Advertising on a network gives you multiple opportunities to advertise on a wide variety of radio show broadcasts, and we have one to fit every advertising need. In recent years, internet radio has exhibited a phenomenal listener growth. An Arbitron Edison survey shows that online radio boosts at least 33 million unique visitors each week and 54 million each month. And that number amazingly continues to grow. And these listeners are a part of many businesses' core demographics. And surveys have shown that internet radio listeners are far more likely than regular radio listeners to spend money on a whole range of activities. Internet listeners vote, they dine out and eat fast food, and they grab a cup of coffee. And here's the interesting one. They buy items online at a much higher rate than all other market segments combined. Internet radio also enables businesses to connect with consumers during work hours, where increasingly more lifestyle decisions are being made. Advertise with the best. The Inception Radio Network offers competitive advertising rates to fit just about anyone's advertising budget. Stop by today at www.inceptionradionetwork.com or call us toll-free at 1-888-919-2355. Get the word out. Get results with the Inception Radio Network.
Who were the gods of antiquity? They've been described as the forces of nature, levels of consciousness, and aspects of our psyche. Stories that depict their incredible weapons, their flying machines, and their amazing adventures are characterized as being the product of our ancestors' fanciful imaginations. But what if the tales of the gods are true? Did the writers, chroniclers, and scribes of our distant past actually document a realistic view of our origin? My latest book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, looks at our most ancient legends. Learn of the torrid romances, elaborate plots, violent scandals, and conspiracies that played out in antiquity. Find out the role the gods played in the life and culture we have today. If you want to find out the truth of who we are and where we come from, order your copy of Man-Made today. For more information, go to www.manmadethechronicles.com. That's www.manmadethechronicles.com.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Move past the crossroads in your life and discover alternative solutions to your deepest concerns at soulhealer.com. So whether it's a physical problem, an emotional issue, a question about work, or troubles in your relationships, naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise can help you. Bring peace, harmony, and health back into your life. Schedule a session today. Visit soulhealer.com right away and live the life you've been dreaming of.
You didn't forget what's coming up tonight, did you? Hi, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Never miss that interview you were looking forward to or the show on your favorite topic. Follow IRN on Twitter, I_R_N, and get reminders about the evening's live shows as well as fun and important updates throughout the week. That's I_R_N, and never miss a great show again.
We only have a couple of seconds before we have to get back to the show, and I want to tell you how you can jumpstart your intuition today. Using my free 50-page introductory guide filled with simple, revolutionary, and proven techniques, you can ignite your intuition and tap into your inner wisdom, all from the comfort of your own home. The Institute of Applied Energetics is the leader in online home study instruction for those interested in becoming a certified medical intuitive, intuitive counselor, or energy medicine practitioner. Now is the time to transform your life and take it to a completely new level. Discover who you are and how you work. Open the door to the world of intuition, health, and healing. You can jumpstart your intuition right away by going to www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and downloading our free guide. Get the opportunity of a lifetime and live the life you deserve. Download your free Jumpstart Your Intuition guide today at www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and begin living a life filled with passion and purpose.
A computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ.
Go deep inside yourself and venture into the realm of the unconscious mind with my Meditating on the Kabbalah guided imagery audio CDs. Discover who you are and what you want in life. Meditating on the Kabbalah can help you to open, clear, and revitalize the energetic pathways of your subtle being. They will support you in your spiritual quest by helping you to access the profound insights and inner guidance you need as you work in alignment with your highest good. Let them help you to release negative thoughts and emotions and clear away any limitations that may be keeping you from experiencing your full potential. Walk down the path to health, healing, understanding, and enlightenment with Meditating on the Kabbalah. Order your copy today at www.soulhealer.com. That's right, that's www.soulhealer.com.
Hello, Inception Radio Network. Would you like your favorite show to be played again live on air? Well, now the choice is in your hands with IRN's live request portal, an easy way to request your favorite show with a simple click. IRN's live request portal now gives you exclusive access to all of the shows. How easy is it? Simply type a show name or a guest name, click request, even write a dedication message, and that's it. Try it now. Simply visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com, click on the live request tab under the show menu. Now playing your favorite show is just a mouse click away.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. This hour of the show is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading our free 50-page guide. And for the month of October, you can actually start learning to become a certified medical intuitive counselor, or certified energy medicine practitioner, all from the comfort of your home. All of our training programs are 30% off. Check them out, AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com. Also brought to you by SoulHealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer. Don't forget, get your copy of E.T. Chronicles and Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of Our Ancient, both available on Amazon.com, both discounted. Get them, please, because they're mine, and you guys like me a little bit. At least that's what some people tell me. Anyway, so we've been talking to Brandon Hurd about his book, Ancient Mississippi. And Brandon, I meant to mention this before the break, and I forgot, that you also have a Facebook page that's called Ancient Mississippi. And why don't you just spend a couple seconds telling people what you actually put on that page? Because I know that you have a lot of information that you actually post there to share with people.
Okay, that's a page where I highlight and I reveal a lot of the photographs, and I try and make it in short bullet format where I don't try and overwhelm somebody with all this information. But I believe that a picture can tell is worth 1,000 words, and I try and put together the photographs and images in a way that kind of tell the story without having to read too much. So it's easy to digest. And in addition to my research, several other authors and researchers have begun to contribute a wealth of just very interesting related subject matter. And it's also, it's where I've had several people contact me through this Facebook group and have shared with me some of their finds, some artifacts that they've found that they don't know what to do with, that are artifacts in this vein. They fall outside of accepted history. So, and whenever I get that, I try and run those to the ground as best I can, or put them in touch with somebody who's maybe better qualified.
Mm-hmm. So when we left off, we were talking about some of the mining and copper that has been excavated from around the country. Is there any other kind of evidence of other cultures coming to the Americas that we don't really hear about?
Definitely. There are, as far as, once again, the Mediterranean cultures that were, you could write an encyclopedia on the artifacts that have that appear to suggest a connection. Okay, the multiple shipwrecks, throughout the coastlines of North and South America that I talked about earlier. But there's some other things. Some other agricultural things that show up. For example, back in the mid 70s, they began to find nicotine in mummies, and nicotine because from tobacco, which is from the Americas. They really didn't have nicotine in the old world. In addition, they find cocaine residue in a large number of mummies. So
I guess they have all the good stuff here in America.
Yes, all the goods. Well, they took it back. That's what they were. They came and got what they didn't have. Also, North American corn of the type grown in the Americas shows up in artwork where they allegedly didn't have North American corn in Egypt, but it shows up in their artwork.
Well, I was just, okay, I'm really kind of geeky, and I've been reading the Old Testament again. Actually, I'm working on a bunch of articles, and so I needed to reference, and so I was like, I'm just going to read the Torah again and get my material. And one of the things that they were talking about was about corn, Moses and corn and something. And I have written a piece, actually it was published in Ancient America, about the evolution and development of corn in the Americas. And corn is an indigenous crop to the Americas. And so how could they have had it in Egypt? And actually that was something I was going to start to run down myself. How could they have had it in Egypt by Moses's time if there wasn't some kind of a connection back then?
Correct. And when you talk about Moses' time, that's I think it's it's hard to put an exact date on that, but it's generally accepted that it was around 1450 BC, which incidentally is the time that the Minoan culture, who appears to have been involved in this global copper trade, that's when their civilization began to decline, because they were a significant portion of their island was devastated by a tsunami from a nearby volcanic island blew up, and it struck the island of Crete so bad that it seemed to set the Minoans back. And it caused their culture to then go into decline. So that's kind of about the time frame that it appears that this industry began to taper off, was about the era of Moses. And if you, speaking of the Bible, if you look at the Exodus, many of the things can be explained as a result of natural disaster. Most of the plagues that were set upon Egypt could be explained by environmental disruptions, the locusts, the frogs, the water turning to blood. Some of the others escape me right now, but it seems plausible that many of these could be explained by ecological disaster nearby. Also, as Moses began to go, they began to go towards the promised land, Israel. At night they followed pillars of fire. Well, that sounds like
no extraterrestrial connection there.
No, there's pillars of fire. Well, I'm saying it sounds like it could have been a volcanic event. A volcanic, which was to the north of them. I mean, it was out in the Mediterranean, the island of Crete. It very likely, it could have gone high enough to where it would have been a fire in the sky.
So are you trying to tie Exodus to the explosion at Santorini?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah. Seems plausible. So.
I mean, and I think it's a very interesting theory, and just as long as you don't call it Atlantis, which some people want to do.
Some people do. I
know some people do.
Yeah. And you mentioned Atlantis. As far as the story of the most compelling account of this, the best case for this global copper trade is put out in a book by Gavin Menzies. A book not written for academics. It's written for a more general readership, such as myself. And it makes it all very easy to digest in a non-academic way, which most of the stuff that we deal with here is put out in an academic format, which is slightly more difficult to digest than how Gavin Menzies does it. Now, his book was I know Atlantis was in the title, but the case that he lays out, it's very, very, very compelling. And he was he was in the Royal Navy. He was a submarine commander for the majority of his career, and he has made the voyage, across the Atlantic quite a few times, and he's very familiar with one of the things that he brought to the table with his accounts. Was a very strong knowledge of ancient seamanship and of currents, and he explains it very plausibly, how the Minoans, how their artwork, their frescoes that they've excavated depicts very large multi-masted ships that would have been very capable of making this voyage. And then he makes the case, of where, the Minoan, this shipwreck, this Minoan shipwreck that was found off the coast of Turkey, it had trade items from 5 continents, 5 different continents. They had Baltic amber, they had African ivory, and other things, North American copper. So the case of that it was the Minoans who were known in that era as the copper traders in charge of the copper industry. And the reason why perhaps it's not, well, first of all, we didn't really know about the Minoans until the early 1900s. That's when they were first rediscovered, on the island of Crete. And the extent of their civilization was really not known until fairly recently. So as far as their expeditions to the Americas, well, bronze, which is 9 parts copper to 1 part tin. The tin probably came from England because they find Minoan evidence in England. It was technology of its era, and so this is not something that they would have shared, where they were getting these large quantities of very, very pure copper. This would have been, a classified military operation, because if you had bronze weapons and the kingdom next year's had stone weapons, or if they had copper weapons, you could easily annihilate them. You would win the battles. So that was that little bit of technology that would give your military a superior position on the battlefield. So it's just like now. If we're not going to reveal the source of our military technology, we're going to keep it a secret. So that's why it wasn't necessarily widely known. So that's the Minoan copper trade. But there's evidence of other, in North America specifically, there have been several Egyptian artifacts found. There was one, there's been an Egyptian, a clearly Egyptian statue that was found in Libertyville, Illinois. I mean, it appears to be a distinctly Egyptian artifact. So there's also been very distinctly Egyptian statues found in El Salvador, as well as here in Jackson, Mississippi, and we have a world-class collection of South and Central American artifacts. And some of those depict distinct characteristics of Egyptian influence. There's a figure that has a Nefertiti hat. It was found in Mexico, and it's here in my local museum. So, and the style of Nefertiti hat, it appears it's not uncommon in certain types of Mexican cultures. And
was
the
that
list
a
goes on and on.
traditional kind of headdress?
Well, I think it was a ceremonial. It appears that it was something very important, and it appears on high quality, important figures, clay figures. It was something they were wanting to memorialize. Was these Egyptians were something they wanted to record, that their presence was something they wanted, that was something important to them, and they wanted to leave a record of it. And that's how they did it. They did it in work. So, I mean,
One of the things that you talk about in your book, Ancient Mississippi, is about coins that were found. Could you talk
Yes.
about that a little bit? Because I think, when we go and dig around and you find a coin, I mean, it's kind of like a timestamp, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. It also kind of depends on how it was found and where it was found, how deep it was found. Was it found in in an Indian mound, that kind of thing? And I'm sorry, but there have been at least 10 that I'm aware of. Very likely many more, and there's certainly many more that have not been found. But there have been at least 10 old world coins found throughout the southern central U.S. And these coins have been studied. They've been determined by academics to be legitimate coins from, many of them appear to have originated from Carthage, circa 400 A.D. So that timeline doesn't necessarily line up with the Minoan theory, but it does line up with a later visitations to the Americas.
But when you find things like that, it makes you think that scholars think that we're running around and I have this Egyptian coin and I'm just going to toss it on the ground. I mean, really?
Well, their argument is that it's coin collectors who have just lost these coins.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, come on.
And I can argue that if you had found one, it's pretty plausible that, birds could have carried it, fish could have eaten it and swam over here. That's plausible for one, maybe two. But they're finding these coins and other Roman-style artifacts along specific waterways, specifically the Ohio River Valley and the Ohio River. That's where they find these old world coins and other metal artifacts that may have been Roman in origin. Now, there's another very, very sound theory out there by a fellow researcher, Rick Osman, that the Roman Ninth Legion came to the Americas. They kind of disappeared from history under kind of mysterious circumstances. They seem to have dropped off the radar, I believe, about 300 AD. And they were a very notable fighting force up until a certain point, and then they just vanished. And it's been theorized that they came to the Americas for some reason. And I believe I mentioned earlier that there are some stone structures throughout Indiana and Tennessee that are built in a fashion that's very much in line with Roman military structures, specifically signal towers. And they find other artifacts that they had built a series of signal towers throughout the Ohio Valley. And they also find some Roman metal artifacts. So there's that era of visitation. And there's also appears that there was a Celtic presence in North America and possibly South America as well. But recently or now in West Virginia, there's another fellow researcher, Yoli Molina, who she has found some incredible stone carvings that they match identically to Celtic stone carvings found in northern France and in Germany and in England, northern France and in England, and they're exactly the same. And they find these alongside Ogham writing, which is a ancient Celtic style of writing that people of that era would have left. And so the Celtics are not the same as the Viking group that we pretty much only ever hear about. Yes, correct. It's a different group, and it would have been very likely an earlier visitation. You know, and I saw some TV show that was talking about that there was actually a Jewish presence here in the United States too. What's with that? Yes. That evidence is once again overwhelming. If you would have a feature on it on my Facebook group, there's the Bat Creek stone, which has become recognized as a legitimate artifact, and it depicts it was found, I believe, in 1872, and it sat for 60 plus years in a museum, and they thought it was the writing that was on it. They just thought, oh, that's just some Cherokee symbols. Well, a researcher in the 40s took another look at the artifact, turned it upside down, and realized that it was an early form of Hebrew writing. So it went for, if this was a hoax, it wasn't a very good hoax, okay, by the alleged perpetrator. And it's funny how the academics have gone after the guy who found it. They've just attacked his integrity. Made him out to be a lot of things. But another gentleman who has studied the artifact very deeply, he's found out that this guy later served as he was a Civil War veteran. He was injured Civil War veteran who later was elected to some high offices in the county that he lived in. So he wasn't that bad of a character. Whereas historians and the academics have launched in and attacked his integrity. So this Bat Creek stone, which has been highly studied, it was found in an Indian mound. There's also and it's in Ohio. It's an earthwork. Oddly enough, it's called, and it's also on my Facebook site. But the early archaeological drawing of this earthwork, if you look at it, you don't believe it because it's clearly a Jewish menorah with a lamp at the top of it. That's what it clearly is, and this is an earthwork in Ohio. So, why were Native Americans way before Columbus? Why were they creating earthworks that depicted menorahs and Middle Eastern style lamps? Oddly enough, this ties to a period in Jewish history where the exact war eludes me right now, but there were actually two waves, it appears, of Jewish migration to the Americas, and it was as a result of times that they were, fighting large wars. I mean, they were refugees that were showing up on the shores of America, and they were building. They had these artifacts. They had these Middle Eastern style lamps that are found.
So RW has a question, and he wants to know if you know anything about Little Egypt in Illinois.
Yeah, I've looked into that, and there's also, like, here in Mississippi, we've got Egyptian place names, and I kind of hit a wall with that. It appears that a lot of these towns were named during an era where religion was an important part of the vernacular, and a popular story was Egypt was a common theme. So I think that a lot of these places were named because of maybe how that city or how that region, how it kind of like was similar to a biblical an area in the Bible. So I think they're more Bible names rather than specifically names for that were as leftover from earlier occupations, earlier visitations. I think it's just kind of more of a modern tradition.
All right, there was another question, and now I'm trying to find it. Okay, and actually I've had two people make a comment about this, about do you know anything about the Chinese people? So not the Siberian wave that we all know about, but about Chinese coming to North America in the BCs.
Yes, and that's more of the. I'm familiar with that story. Also, Gavin Menzies. He's probably the most prolific researcher on that particular vein. But yeah, he makes a very compelling case of a Chinese visitation to one degree or another to the Americas. I mean, they had massive sailing vessels, and there are artistic. There's artistic Asian signatures left behind in a variety of artifacts. Some of those I highlight on my Facebook member group. Artifacts that they look like it's a surprise when you look at them when I tell you that they came from Mexico. You think, no, these are not Mexican things. These are clearly Asian. So, yes, there was a definite Asian connection.
But it doesn't seem like in any of these groups that they came here with the understanding that they were going to stay, because it doesn't seem like any of their technology really came with them other than these very small fragments. Unless, and I will throw in an unless, it's all buried and has yet to be uncovered.
Yeah, I mean that's characteristic of North America. If you, especially for example here in Mississippi, if you go, if I build a house in the woods, and I leave it alone for 10 years, I'm going to come back in 10 years and there's going to be trees growing up through it. So, and earthworms, creating material these things are gonna sink. They're gonna disappear
unless they were constructed in the 21st century, and then they'll just stay for forever.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, some of these artifacts, some of these things, for example, the Olmec statues. Of what you're around every day, 3,500 years from now, how much of that's still going to be there?
Well, I mean, some of that material is so hard that I wouldn't doubt that it would still be here.
Well, it'll still be here, but it'll be it will have been worked into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Unlike a McDonald's drink cup.
It could be worked very deep in the ground.
But it'll still be recognizable, and the graphics won't even have worn off.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that there was necessarily a McDonald's cups, 1500 BC, but
Well, no, but I always conjecture, 5,000 years down the road, and archaeologists are, uncovering some area and they find this cup with the god to the golden arches or this female goddess figure, Wendy, because of all of these ritualistic cups that are used, to honor her and it. All sarcasm intended.
Starbucks, the Starbucks.
But see,
siren.
all of theirs are paper.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? McDonald's and all the fast food, they're all plastic. Mm-hmm. A lot of them have gone to styrofoam, so that might be a little more biodegradable. But, that hard plastic, that ain't going anywhere for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Canopic jars. Would make a great canopic jar. So one of the sites, when I was going through your book, something that really intrigued me, and I'd like to have a little conversation about this, was a discovery, and I didn't write down which site, of clay pyramids.
Well, it was a clay structure. A floor is a more accurate description of this thing. And it came out of a journal that dated to 1872, and it gave a rough location to the place that it took knocking on a few doors and asking if anybody was familiar with this place, and it turned up pretty quick. But once I arrived there, it matched identically to the description in the 1872 description. And at that time they described it as a clay floor that emerged when they began to remove 3 feet of earth in this one particular area of Mississippi. Okay, so that's what was there. There was a level of earth 3 feet above it, with trees on it and everything, and then there was this clay, obviously man-made floor. That it had areas where it was obviously worked. Okay, like it had a lip. It had a lip on one side. So, and it also had an artistic rendering of some kind. It has been exposed, and it has been driven over for over 100, for a long time now. They integrated into part of a rural road. So, but it's not driven over very much, but it's part of a road. And so it has begun to crack, and it's not like it was in 1872. But it is still obviously man-made. It also it's loaded up with, I've never seen anything like this, but it has large chunks of iron or perhaps iron ore that are all around it, which is very unusual. So it's, Dr. List and myself, we hypothesize it's near a body of water, and the hypothesis is this was perhaps a loading dock for the iron operation, because it's next to it's not very far from the Brandywine stone wall. It's connected by a waterway, and it goes to a larger waterway. So,
Okay, so that wasn't really what I was talking about, but that is pretty interesting. So the one that because I just opened your book and found, I'm like, okay, I'm going to find the reference. This was the clay pyramids at Jakestown.
Okay, Jaketown, yes.
Jaketown.
Yes.
And the reason that I bring it up is that, well, let me hear what you have to say, and then I'll throw out my little blurb on it. And the part that I'm the most curious about are the shaped pieces that look like pyramids.
Yes.
Pyramids.
Yes. Okay. Those are, and I found something out recently about that, but that shape, and you're going to have to remind me, there's a term I use to describe the shape. It's not
Tetrahedron?
Tetrahedron. Thank you very much. Yes. Okay, Jaketown. It's once again, it predates Poverty Point. Okay, but it's a Native American site that it's a predecessor to the Poverty Point culture. Later, it was occupied by the Poverty Point culture, but it's older than the Poverty Point site. And like I said, Dr. List and myself were in the area. We're knocking on doors of people that live near the place. And this one lady pulls out, it's a clay ball, and it has a rough clay ball, and it has a very finely polished clay pipe that fits perfectly through the clay ball. What that tells me is they were doing something there at very high temperatures, whether that was a kiln for ceramics or perhaps a crude iron refining operation there. They did have artifacts that come from there. They call them plummets, that to a layman such as myself, they appear to have been made of crude iron ore. They're very fine objects, and they're very, very heavy. They're made. The term that the archaeologist uses is heavy iron ore. Okay, I use crudely refined iron. Okay, because it appears to be like iron to me. And so this is what Poverty Point was known for, was for these plummets. Now the tetrahedrons, they are found in quantity, and they have some there at a little museum, but they're these little pyramidal, anywhere from like 2 inches tall roughly, but they find them in number there, and they were written about. As far they don't know what their purpose was, so really it's speculation, but what they could have been used for is for maybe it's flux for a furnace, to help a furnace come to high temperatures. These were fired clay artifacts. They had been taken to very high temperature. They said because of the color, they were like almost white. So there's that potential. There's also the potential that these artifacts were from the most ancient sites, the most ancient civilization in North America. And there is the idea of geometric that had a very significant shape for that realm, that school of thought. So that could have played a role. So we really don't know what they were, but they're very interesting, and I would like to know, be interesting to study them further. No doubt.
Well, what I find interesting is that they have actually found other pyramidal items in the Americas and in Bosnia, by the Bosnian pyramid, and they were carved. They were actually carved and had like little lines on them, like a regular pyramid, you would think. Now, finding something like that, in my expert opinion, finding something like that in Bosnia would maybe make sense, because there is the potentiality that someone actually saw the pyramids and made a copy of it.
Exactly.
But in the Americas, to find a straight-sided pyramid, there is no exemplar.
Yes.
Because all of the pyramids, minus the ones that are in Egypt on the Giza Plateau, all are stepped pyramids.
Yeah.
Well, and Nubia. That is the exception to the rule versus the rule. But why would you find pyramids in the Americas with straight sides if there are no straight-sided pyramids in the Americas?
Yeah. Once again, just another piece of the puzzle, maybe,
Yeah, I don't know.
And what an incredible puzzle it is. So, You know,
Anyway,
so I want to kind of go back and kind of reach somewhat further back. You know,
okay.
I wanted to look at the question of who the earliest humans in the Mississippi area were. And, you know, I was doing the research, and the oldest, you know, date that I could find affixed to an artifact found in Mississippi was 10,000 BC, and it's some Clovis points, some spearheads, Clovis spearheads. So I thought, okay, well, the Clovis people were perhaps the first humans in Mississippi. And like I said, one of the dates is the accepted date back then. This is a very artifact found back in the 70s. But they put 10,000 BC on it, which was probably very controversial at the time. But if you begin to kind of study the Clovis culture hypothesis, what's begun to emerge is if you follow that style of stone technology or craftsmanship, that trail goes back to across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe, specifically to France, where on that side of the ocean they're Lutrians. They made stone tools in a very, very, very similar fashion than the Clovis people did. And they find those artifacts up through Greenland, out over into Europe. However, if you try to follow that same stone evidence, if you try to follow it up to Alaska, it begins to go cold in Alaska, and it goes completely cold once you cross the Bering Strait into Siberia. It disappears. That style of stone craftsmanship does not exist in Siberia. They have a completely different stone tool methodology. They use very small blades that were embedded into bone. Okay, so a completely different technology once you cross the Bering Strait. So it's becoming to be accepted that one of the proponents is an archaeologist, Dennis Stanford of Smithsonian, and also another gentleman, Bruce Bradley from the University of Exeter. They have been the proponents of this theory, and one of the dates that they seem to kind of bandy about is about 25,000 BC for this from this migration of some type from Europe to the Americas. So this 25,000 year time frame predates, the Asian, and certainly, the current Native Americans. There's a distinct Asian genetic influence there, but they are obviously somewhat different than Asians. Okay, it's been a blend. Mm-hmm. There's a blend there. They don't look specifically Asian. They look like a blend. And specifically, the Cherokees look more. They look more European than the type of Native American that you would find as an Alaskan. Let's say an Alaskan is going to look very Asian. A Native American from the West, he's going to look. As you move to the east, the Native Americans, they when they would first encounter Europeans, they looked much less Asian. So anyway, now what appears happened to this first wave of civilization that came to the Americas about 10,000 BC, there was a massive cometary event in the eastern U.S. It hit there very hard, and also in Europe. But and it's evidenced by there's a layer of microdiamonds that you'll find when they excavate these sites and they find these Clovis artifacts. there's a layer of microdiamonds on top of the artifacts, but not directly under them.
So is that part of the Carolina Bay?
Carolina
impact?
Bays, yes. That is certainly the Carolina Bays were. Yes, this particular cometary event helped create some of the Carolina Bays. Some of them are older, okay, but some of the Carolina Bays were this, okay, and that set back the Clovis/Solutrean people to where they were probably either wiped out or reduced to the point where the Asians sort of assimilated them.
And so do you think that, because there's a lot of people that talk about things that happened around 10,000 BC, the end of the woolly mammoth and the other giant mammal creatures that were all over the planet. Do you think that this Carolina Bay's impact was responsible for a global catastrophe, not just a local catastrophe?
It would appear so. Yeah, it would appear so. That it was a significant event. That it hit certain areas worse than others. But they have found mastodon remains with meteorite fragments embedded in them, as well as human remains with meteorite fragments embedded in them that date to this era.
Okay. So what do you think caused, because it seems like when Westerners came to the Americas, they're, and I might be talking out of a totally biased comment, but it appears as if the level of culture and civilization that they did find had declined from something that was at a much higher level.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on why these cultures did decline?
Okay. Well, let's look at the accounts from De Soto's historian, who would have been the first European to encounter Native Americans. And De Soto's historian describes a far, far more advanced indigenous people. He describes they had furniture covered in tapestry. They had tapestries hanging on their walls. They had houses with walls around them, with walls around the houses. They had quote unquote churches with steeples. They had large, regularly surveyed farms. They traveled in royal barges, and they had kings and queens that governed very large areas. These are the words of De Soto's historian. So now, what likely happened from that encounter is 100 years. Mm-hmm.
Okay, very quick though, because we need to wrap up. All right, actually, really need to go. So if somebody say that again.
Okay. End of story.
Okay. Get the book. That's what you just say. Get the book.
Get the book.
So if somebody wants to get a copy of your book, Ancient Mississippian, where is the best place to send them?
Amazon.com. Just type in Ancient Mississippi or my name, Brandon Hurd.
Well, okay. Hey, Brandon, thanks for coming on the show and enlightening people to all of this stuff that is, right in their own backyard that they don't even know about.
Yep. Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure to share. It's going to turn into a passion for me.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. Keep it up. Keep knocking on doors because that's just really cool.
Yeah, we've only just begun here.
Cool. All right, well, I'm going to let you go, and I will talk to you again soon.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Hey, bye-bye.
That's Brandon Hurd. His book is Ancient Mississippi. You can like his page on Facebook, which is Ancient Mississippi, which has all kinds of pictures and great stuff. And then next week, we have Jennifer O'Neill coming on to talk about energy vampires. And then Rick Delano coming on talking about geocentrism. What is it? I don't know. Tune in next week and find out. And so until then, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio.